All right, hello YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. For this episode, we want to talk about a video that was recently posted by Kellen, who runs the Killing for Company YouTube channel. You may know Kellen from the Heavy Metallurgy Album Club series. He does a video every Wednesday night with Jim and Marty, where they pick an album and review it in detail for about an hour. Sometimes it's an old classic, sometimes it's a new release, sometimes it's kind of an under the radar release folks aren't very familiar with. So it's always a good time. And Kellen does his own videos on his own channel as well. And I really like his content. It's usually very thoughtful. He puts, a lot of work into the videos. And he recently posed a very interesting question, and several people have already posted some response videos. I was going to type out a reply in the comments to his video, quickly realized I had a little too much to say to type out, and so I figured, well, I'll just do a response video as well. Why not? So, yeah, kudos to Kellen for bringing up a topic that I think has struck a chord with a lot of folks who make videos on YouTube, because, yeah, multiple people have wanted to chime in and give more detailed answers to this. If you want to watch some of the other videos, Simon over at Explosive Action posted a very detailed video. Pat at Ground Zero Salem weighed in with a very lengthy and well thought out reply. And also another reply video I saw was on a channel called Surface Noise Vinyl. And I don't know the name of the person who does that channel, but they also had, a nice detailed response video. So Kellen's video, yeah, definitely getting a lot of eyeballs and getting a lot of responses. The basic question Kellen posed was, can metalheads be audiophiles? Now, we've all heard this joke, or even made this joke in different conversations, or we've heard it come up in different streams or different videos about, why would any of us pay a lot of money for expensive stereo equipment just to play the Ramones and Cannibal Corpse and Venom albums on it? It seems a little oxymoronic to be really worried about high fidelity sound quality issues when you're playing that kind of extremely noisy, garage music at best, and just flat out noise at worst. But Kellen wanted to dive into that a little bit more. A big part of the reason is he's recently relocated. There's more space in the place he's living at now. And so he's interested in putting together a nicer audio system. And he realized that there's not really a lot of talk about audio equipment among heavy metal people on YouTube. People talk about albums a lot. You can watch 5 different collection update videos a day if you're so inclined. But people rarely dive into the details of what kind of equipment they're playing stuff on. And so it's left him at a bit of a crossroads, trying to figure out what he should buy, how much to invest, stuff like that. So there were several points that came up in his video that, I had some thoughts on. A while back, I had started to make a video with some of these ideas in it, but I never bothered to finish it because there wasn't really a common theme that tied it all together. So it just kind of felt like a loose assemblage of random thoughts and opinions. But I realized, in the context of this audiophile question, a lot of it makes sense. And especially also with the added input from the videos made by Simon and Pat and Surface Noise Vinyl. So the first thing, just, to answer Kellen's question so that it doesn't get lost in the mix, can heavy metal fans be audiophiles? Yes, absolutely. I don't see why not. Yeah, again, as Pat mentioned in his video, a textbook definition of audiophile basically just means somebody that's very interested in trying to reproduce a live music sound with their stereo equipment. You're trying to get the best possible sound quality out of whatever gear you have. And it shouldn't matter whether you're listening to Mozart or Beethoven or Motorhead and Behemoth. You can still always do that. I know plenty of metalheads who take great joy and put a ton of work into trying to tease out drum fills that Bill Ward was doing in the background on different Black Sabbath takes, and they're kind of buried in the mix sometimes, and they're always trying to tease out those details. So yeah, short answer, heavy metal fans can absolutely be audiophiles. There's no reason they can't. The angle I'm going to play out here, and it kind of runs along with Kellen's question, is why don't we see more people in heavy metal circles profess to be audiophiles? It was kind of interesting watching Simon's video because, Simon said very pointedly, I am not a audiophile. When you sit through his whole video, I would argue Simon is very much an audiophile. He really knows the nuts and bolts of his equipment and how to tweak it and where to place things and stuff that I think most of us would associate with, audiophiles. But, Kellen's right. Most metal fans don't call themselves audiophiles or seem to be, put in that category. And a lot of audiophiles don't really view heavy metal as something that's audiophile material. So that's what I'm going to kind of look at. And some points I want to make with that. Now, let's just start working through them here. The first reason that's kind of obvious, and Kellen touched on this a lot, is that heavy metal, it's considered a very loud, noisy, kind of chaotic style of music. And as such, it's going to be difficult or seem rather pointless, especially to people who aren't fans of the music, to sit there and try to tease out the details. If you're listening to Discharge or some gore grind band, and you're coming from a classical music perspective, yes, it sounds just like a great big mess, and your default assumption is that there's really nothing in there worth teasing out, which of course is unfair. As I mentioned before, there's lots of detail and lots of heavy metal music that could be worked out there. But it is a very different style of music. When most people think of audiophiles, we're thinking of people who listen to lots of classical music or opera, things that maybe are softer, where there is a little more nuance maybe in the composition that people can really dig into and try to, again, reproduce that live sound. And with those styles of music, the live sound is often thought of as being very superior. They're played in concert halls, they're played in opera houses, where the entire room and the entire building is specifically designed to create these incredible acoustic experiences that you then try to recreate with your stereo equipment. Things like heavy metal, on the other hand, this is music that's played in beer halls and pool halls and barns and flats where people are just flopping, burned out. You're not going to get amazing acoustics in those kind of settings. So what's the point of trying to recreate the live sound? Because the live sound may not have been all that great in the first place. So yeah, there is that stigma about just the style of music. And if you're trying to recreate the live sound, it's meant to be played in very different environments for the most part. You don't really think of Black Sabbath or Judas Priest or Obituary playing the Sydney Opera House. They play Joe's Garage, places like that. So I think that's one thing. There is a different perception of the music, and it's played in a different live environment in the first place. The second point is that I think a lot of metalheads don't want to necessarily be considered audiophiles because the term audiophile does intrinsically come with an undertone of snobbery. Somebody says they're an audiophile, and right away you're thinking, are you a doctor or a lawyer? Are you one of those guys, like Simon, did some funny pictures in his video. Are you one of those guys with the ridiculously expensive stereo equipment that has this very weird space age sci-fi appearance to it? Are you that jerk who's going to whine about oh, I can hear the third clarinet breathing through her left nostril in between the stanzas? Nobody really wants to be perceived as that guy in the first place, and heavy metal fans especially don't want to be perceived as that guy. Because heavy metal fans, we tend to come from a little bit more of an anti-establishment or anti-elitist mindset. And again, the stereotype for heavy metal fans is that we're outside the mainstream. And the idea of being lumped in with the audiophiles, who again are, tut-tutting because, the fluff and Twitter on their left speaker is off by 0.3% and it's impairing my ability to hear the timpani. That doesn't jive with have a beer, throw up the horns, and crank your venom. It just doesn't work together quite right. It gives the wrong, impression. Now, it is worth noting as a quick aside here, while a lot of heavy metal folks like to kind of frame themselves in those anti-elitist kind of frames, once you get into heavy metal circles, of course, there is a lot of elitism and exclusivity that goes on. We all see it happen all the time. People constantly saying, well, if you don't listen to these 4 heavy metal bands, you can't possibly be a serious metalhead. Or, oh, if you don't like this, true cult black metal, or if your black metal band, is signed to a real label, or if you're a black metal artist and we actually know what your last name is, you can't possibly be true. There's a lot of that crap that goes on in heavy metal. We all know it. That's a topic for another time. The bottom line here is, though, that in general, many heavy metal fans don't want to have that kind of air of snobbery associated with them because it doesn't really go with the rest of the heavy metal ethos that is prevalent in our particular corner of the underground. All right, a third point about why audiophiles and metal don't necessarily go together, and I think this is a very big one, is simply the cost. And this was touched on by Kellen, it was touched on by Simon and other folks too, but the bottom line is good stereo equipment is going to cost a lot of money. There is really no upper limit to how much you can spend. Right now on the screen, I'm looking at a turntable that I can buy from House of Stereo. It is $51,000 US. It literally looks like something that would be attached to a satellite sent into the deep parts of our galaxy to collect pictures of Saturn or something. Why is this turntable $51,000? I have no idea. Let's read a couple of things in the description for a moment, just for fun. This is a VPI Industries Titan turntable. You do get free shipping, by the way, so hey, value. We have some specifications. Wow and flutter, 0.03%. Speed and accuracy, 0.04%. Rumble, 86 decibel down. I'm saying words that I know, but when I put them together in this order, they mean absolutely nothing to me. Under the You May Also Like section, by the way, if 51,000 is a little too proletariat for you, they do have a different VPI system for $135,000. It looks like a giant oversized abacus crossed with a wine rack. I don't know what else to say about that. The take-home message is you can spend as much money as you want to building a stereo system. Hundreds of thousands of dollars is a very real possibility if you go that deep. And yes, I've known some guys that have spent a little too much time looking at those $20,000 and $30,000 turntables and kind of, so free shipping, you say? And you can see they're doing the math. It's a thing for them. So obviously now that's kind of, at the silly extreme end. But even, just splicing together a more modest stereo system, it's going to run you hundreds of dollars. It is not a hard thing at all to spend $1,000 putting together a system. I think, Kellen mentioned that was about the budget he worked on putting together his system. I think Simon or Pat mentioned they were probably like in the same ballpark. When I built my personal stereo system about 10 or 12 years ago, so around 2010, 2011, I spent somewhere between $500 and $1,000 on it. I don't remember exactly. I got very lucky and got some of the components on a big sale. But yeah, it's when you start trying to buy something halfway decent above, the joke Crosley level material, it's going to be hard not to spend about $1,000, which is a sizable chunk of money. That can be a lot of money for anyone. But I think for metal fans in particular, that tends to be a relatively large amount of money. Something I have noticed, and other people have noticed too, about heavy metal fans, and this comes from decades of experience dealing with other folks in this hobby. Heavy metal fans, when it comes to record buying, record collecting, those aspects of heavy metaldom, we have a reputation of being relatively cheap. And I'm not saying this to make anybody feel bad. I'm not trying to be accusatory or anything like that. But compared to fans of other music genres, people who collect, psych, prog, blues, Beatles, whatever, we definitely have a reputation of not spending very much money. I don't know all the reasons for that. There may be a socioeconomic status thing going on there. A lot of heavy metal fans probably identify more as middle class to low class and may not have as much disposable income in the first place. Regardless, though, even for folks that are maybe a little more well-to-do or have a career and have more disposable income, I'm always amazed watching videos on different YouTube channels and talking to different people at the number of heavy metal fans who really kind of scoff or wig out a little bit at the idea of paying even $50 for a record. That for a lot of folks, when you ask that all important question, what's the most you've ever paid for a record? For a lot of folks, it's right around that $50 mark. And you can tell even there, they're like a little nervous. They're like, yeah, I can't believe I did that. Don't judge me too harsh. It's just this one time. I swear I never meant to, won't happen again. And, I get that. For some folks, $50 is an awful lot of money. I'm not trying to belittle that whatsoever. What I'm trying to point out, however, is that in other genres of record collecting, $50 is an afterthought. For folks that are seriously into collecting, again, prog music, blues records, old psych records, these people pay hundreds of dollars for things without giving it much thought. Whereas to a lot of heavy metal fans, the idea of paying $100 for a record is completely out of bounds. There's like no way, no how, never going to spend that. Metal fans will, however, spend a lot of money. It's just that they want to spend a lot of money on buying lots of little stuff rather than big stuff. And that's kind of where it comes back to stereo equipment. The classic kind of scenario, you see people all the time, show off, hey, I bought all these records lately, and they've got like, 10 different records that they ordered from, different Bandcamp, groups on Bandcamp or other things on Discogs. And it's just like, I got this one, it's $20. I got this one, it was $20. I got this one. They'll show you 10 albums that were $20 each, and they're super excited and happy to show it off. So they spent $200 and didn't give it a thought. If you ask those same people, in a lot of cases, would you give $200 for this one rare, more collectible album? They're like, oh, heck no, not at all. I would never pay that much for a record. It's like, you will pay that much for records, but you don't want to pay that much for one single item. And that's where the stereo equipment problem comes in, because if you're going to get a decent turntable or a decent receiver or something like that, you're going to have to pay a couple $100 for that one single item. And for whatever reason or reasons, a lot of headbangers, they want to take that $200 and use it to buy 20 albums. They don't want to spend it on one or two big ticket items. They want to buy a lot of small ticket items. Part of this, I think, is, there's a mentality many heavy metal fans and collectors have, that they want to hear as much of it as possible. They want to have as much of the discography as they can track down for a lot of different bands. They want to get, not just, one or two of the cult underground black metal albums. They want to, get the ones from the Belarus scene. They got to get, a bunch of stuff from, from the Polish scene. Got to get a lot of stuff from the Ukrainian scene. Rather than being like, I'm going to get one or two of these and then put money into maybe getting a nice turntable or a better set of speakers. So, yeah, maybe some of it is heavy metal fans, don't have as much disposable income in the first place. But I think a lot of it is that people in metal circles, they spend their disposable income in a different manner. Again, they're trying to amass kind of a quantity of material over going for those one or two more high quality items. That's not a judgment on my part. People can collect however they want to. That's fine. But I think it is a barrier that a lot of headbangers have to overcome when it's time to consider buying nice stereo equipment. That they feel like, hey, I could spend $300 on a good turntable, but hey, that Crosley thing's only $89. If I buy that, I still have money to buy a whole bunch of new CDs on Bandcamp and Discogs when I get home. So there's that. A fourth thing that comes up, and this is true not maybe just for heavy metal fans, but for anybody who's wanting to get nicer stereo equipment. There can be a pretty steep learning curve trying to figure out all the lingo and all the logistics. I read off some stats a few minutes ago from that turntable. What is wow? What is flutter? Are these terms important? Do I need to worry about them? Learning the lingo for stereo equipment is a rabbit hole all in its own. And if you're going to get serious about it and try to learn it, you're going to have to invest not only a good amount of money, but a good amount of time researching it ahead of time, which you should always do before making a big purchase anyway. You should definitely go through and look at the reviews on anything that you're considering buying, not just the star rating. Anything can get 4.5 stars if enough people are paid to just sit there and click the 5-star button. Read some of the reviews. You can figure out pretty quickly which reviews were written by a bot and which ones were written by a human who put some thought and effort into explaining the pros and cons of a given device. So yeah, there is a time investment to learning all this stuff. It's not easy to figure out. It's very easy to get lost because a lot of it gets into weird physics of sound waves and material science, ceramic versus diamond, and all this stuff that most people have zero experience with. When I put my own system together around 2010 and 2011, it took me weeks to figure out exactly what I was going to buy. I tried to invest the time in really sussing it out. I was fortunate in having a couple of collector friends who are audiophiles unashamedly, and they kind of walked me through a lot of different things. And even that, it was tough to digest everything that they were giving me. I had to read and reread and reread a lot of the notes they were sending me to try to figure stuff out. And again, I wasn't investing in really serious high-end stuff. I'll mention my equipment briefly here at the end, but yeah, it's pretty modest, especially compared to what some other folks have been showing. Last thing, I think that may be a bit of a barrier with metalheads and audiophiles coming together in the same sentence is that heavy metal is kind of considered a young person's genre. We're just getting to the point where, those first grandfatherly bands are actually getting to their grandfatherly age, which means we're kind of, the first generation of older fans, that are right there, in the 40s, 50s, 60s age bracket. Most people associate heavy metal music with young people, teenagers, very young adults. And that is a big part of the fan base, absolutely. For folks in that age bracket, there are other barriers and considerations. Those kind of folks often have different living arrangements. Kellen just, got, a fabulous new house. That's awesome. He now has space to set up a nice stereo system. If you're somebody who's just graduated high school or you're in college, you're probably living in an apartment in a relatively low rent part of town. May not be where you want to store really nice stereo equipment. A lot of folks in those age brackets have to live with roommates who may or may not be that responsible. I've had some roommates that I would not have trusted around a really expensive stereo system, not whatsoever. You may be moving more frequently. This was a huge obstacle for me for a very long time. I moved something like 22 times within a 20-year time frame between 1992 and 2002. I can't imagine what it would have been like trying to lug around multiple pieces of expensive stereo equipment all those times. That would have been a nightmare. So I made do with a much cheaper stereo system that was one unit and a couple of cheap speakers. It didn't matter if they got a little dinged up or banged around, moving over and over again. With younger folks too, they're on the go more. And these days, that means everything is, digital. They're not sitting down for multiple hours to enjoy $1,000 stereo system they bought. They're doing a lot of their listening on the go. And this is something I can relate to also. While I have a pretty decent stereo system put together, I don't get to use it as much as I would like to. A lot of my listening is done in the car while I'm commuting. I spend between 7 and 8 hours a week on the road driving back and forth to work. Well, modern cars have Bluetooth. There's not even a CD player in most of them anymore. So I've got to listen to most of my stuff in a digital format. I spend a ton of time in the office working on different projects, working on the computer. I'm going to have music on YouTube playing. I don't have a fancy stereo system in my office. That would be weird. That would be very weird. So, yeah, a lot of times our lifestyle just interferes with our ability to sit down and enjoy music being played on a sort of higher quality stereo system. So why invest in it if you're not really going to get to use it that much? Yeah, I get those points too. All right. There were a couple of other sort of odds and ends that had come up in Kellen's video and some of the others that I wanted to touch on here also. One of the big ones was with people who profess to be audiophiles is, do you really have an ear for music that's going to discern that much of a difference? And this varies. Some people, yes, very much claim that, yeah, they can hear every dropped note and every time somebody, misses a half beat when they shift from, 3/4 time into 6/8 time. Other people don't pick up on those things. Myself, I do not pick up on that. I do not have that kind of detailed ear for the little nuances in music. I just don't, never have, probably never will. But there are some, and whether you have that kind of hearing or not is going to affect how much you want to invest in a stereo system. It would be very foolish for me to go out and buy a $2,000 or $3,000 turntable that's meant to discern these very minute differences in sound quality, because my ears just never register that stuff. My brain doesn't pick that up anyway. So it's not going to be right for me. It may be right for other people. There are some things to consider about that, though. For example, a lot of people make a big deal out of the digital versus analog recording and listening experience. A lot of people are diehard analog fans. They feel again that it's a better representation of the natural sound because it's a continuous recording signal, whereas a digital signal, of course, is chopped up into these little pieces. It's sampled at a certain bit rate. A lot of people make a big deal out of that and claim that, oh, yeah, I don't like things on digital because it has that kind of clippy sound to it. I take some issue with the number of people who claim they can hear this huge difference between analog and digital. And here's why. Scientifically, you can approach this. Science is a little more my background, so I put a little more stock in that than maybe some people do. The bottom line, though, is this. For decent digital sound recording, the sound is being sampled at such a high rate that the human ear is not capable of discerning those differences. That you honestly just cannot hear anything different from it sounds like a continuous sound. Maybe, if you have supernatural hearing of some type, maybe you're picking up a difference. But the vast majority of folks are not actually going to hear a difference between an analog recording and a digital recording when they're played on decent equipment. You're just not. I'm sorry to break it to you. There is no Santa Claus, and the sampling rate is too rapid for the human ear to discern it. It's a little bit like claiming you would only want to watch sporting events in a live stadium environment, that you refuse to watch sports on TV or on video because, well, each play is broken up into frames and the rate of the frames is bothering your eyes. That that little difference is messing with your ability to see the true motion of the players. Your eyes can't pick up the difference between one frame and the next. The human eye doesn't have that kind of resolution. The brain doesn't process the signal that fast. And the same is true when you're using higher audio sampling rates. As another example along those lines, your brain can trick you into sort of thinking things sometimes that just aren't there. A good example of this is years ago, I took students on a field trip to Mammoth Cave up in Kentucky. You go way down below ground in the caverns and look around, and they do a really neat segment on one of the hikes. They get you in this one particular cavern. And they're like, okay, in a moment, we're going to turn off the lights. They just have, very simple lights along the tunnels so you can see where you're going. Like, we're going to kill all the lights in here. We ask everybody, leave your cell phones off and put away. If you have anything like, glow in the dark watch, cover it up, put it in your pocket for a minute. We want to show you something. So they do that. They kill the lights. They're like, okay, just everything's fine here, folks. Nobody panic. Everyone's right here. Just give yourself a moment to adjust and tell us what you see. Yeah, and some people, of course, it's pitch black. Folks look around and folks or the tour guide is like, how many of you think you can make out a little bit of light as you look around? And several people would speak up and be like, yeah, it's very dim, but I still feel like, there's just like a little bit of background light somewhere around here. And the tour guide's like, okay, that's perfectly normal. And that's wrong. It's like, you are standing in one of the very few places on Earth where there is absolutely no light. There's no light you can register here whatsoever. You're in one of the few truly 100% dark places on Earth. And a lot of folks are like, but wait, I feel like I can kind of see some light. Like, that's perfectly normal because your brain is telling you there has to be light here somewhere. And as such, it's trying to create an image in your mind that has some low level of background ambient light to it. But there is absolutely no light in this cavern. Not one little photon worth of light bouncing around right now. Your brain believes there has to be light. And so it's telling you, no, I can see some light, even when it can't. The sampling rate on audio, I think, may be a little bit like that. People know that, okay, there's technically a difference to the way the digital sound is produced, that it, is clipped into these little segments. And so I think for some folks, they start thinking in their mind, I can definitely hear it. I can hear that. I can hear that difference. I really can. Science says, no, you can't. And again, maybe there's that 1 in a million person out there that really can. But scientifically, it's not likely that you're hearing a big difference between analog and digital. Sorry, there's just not. What you will hear a big difference in, though, getting back to Kellen's main point, is the quality of the equipment you're playing it on. If you're playing it on, just a really cheap pair of earbuds versus a nicer set of speakers, yes, there's going to be a difference in sound quality, absolutely. So that's where the big difference is going to come out. It's fine for folks that prefer analog. I'm not trying to harsh on you. I'm not trying to make you feel bad if you're one of those people that feels analog is superior. That's fine. You do you. Enjoy it. You don't have to try to justify it in terms of looking at some kind of scientific rationale for the way the sound is produced that makes you think it's better. If it sounds better to you, great. Listen to it, enjoy it. It's great. I have tons of records. I enjoy it quite a bit. I'm just saying that, yeah, it's probably more about the equipment than it is the actual signal. All right, let's wrap up here. I've talked long enough. Quick notes on my equipment. I'm not going to show it all off. It's not that impressive in the first place. For a turntable, I've got an Audio Technica AT-LP 120. When I was putting my system together right there in the very early 2010s, vinyl had not made a comeback yet. Vinyl was about as dead as it could be. People would almost give it away just to get rid of it. And as such, there weren't a lot of turntable options. You had the Crosleys, of course, which I didn't want that kind of thing. And you had a lot of the high-end $2,000 type turntables for the audiophile crowd. but there was very few things in between. It was funny. The price tended to jump from like, the $119 kind of, garbage point up to about, the $800, $1,000, $2,000 high end point. And of course, I wanted something in between. The Audio Technica was one of the few turntables that fell in that gap. It was somewhere in the $200, $300 range. It's not the most incredible thing on earth. I'm not going to claim it is, but it has good sound. It is built like a tank. There's no budging that thing when it doesn't want to be budged. And it's always worked fine. All the speed settings work fine on it. No issues. It's easy to use, easy to maintain. It's a nice turntable. I helped my dad got one when his old turntable finally died and could not be repaired for the fourth or fifth or sixth time. He was always really happy with it, playing his styles of music as well. Today, I suspect there's a lot more options for kind of a mid-priced turntable than there were 10 years ago. So again, you just got to go out and do your homework, read the reviews, and see what is within your budget that still seems to be a solid piece of equipment. For an amp, I've got an Onkyo. Onkyo's had a long reputation of being pretty good. It works fine. It has very good sound. It would get insanely loud if I wanted it to. I don't play my music very loud, hardly ever. For speakers, I've got a small tabletop pair of Polk Audios. Again, Polk Audio, my dad's had lots of pairs of those over time. They've always given out a really good full sound. These are relatively small, but still have a very good loud sound to them. I've always been pretty impressed with them. CD player, I've got a Sony. It's a 5-disc player. There weren't a lot of options for CD players when I was shopping and putting all this together too, even though CDs at that point, I guess, had already kind of slipped into obscurity and been replaced with more digital stuff. So yeah, there weren't a lot of options on disc players, but this one has functioned absolutely fine. I like being able to load multiple discs in it. It's one flat tray that just rotates. There's not one of those old cartridge things you have to load them into. Those things will damage CDs very, very easily. And that's really it. I don't have a cassette deck at this point. I got rid of all my cassettes years ago. I have a small handful left. I can't play them. I'm okay with that. I've got 90% of the music on digital formats, and I'll play those, through the computer or something else. The one thing I'm missing that I could use, I do need some kind of Wi-Fi speaker or something for playing music through the computer. That might be something I invest in 2023. But there we have it. I've talked for longer than I intended to, but hopefully this has added something to the conversation going on that Kellen brought up, and hopefully made some points that make some sense. And again, I do want to say in closing, nothing I said about analog versus digital or Metalheads not wanting to spend $200 per record, none of that is meant in a derogatory or derisive manner. Everybody should spend what they're comfortable spending, what they can afford to spend. Everybody should collect in the manner that they like to collect, and get the equipment that seems to work best and sound good for you, your living situation, and how you like to listen. All right, so let's talk metal in the comments down below. If you want to nerd out a bit about your own stereo setup, by all means, leave a comment and let me know what you got. Sooner or later, one of my components is going to go kaput. It never hurts to know what other things people are using that they would recommend. If you have recommendations for really good Wi-Fi speakers for using with a laptop, that's something, again, that, I may have to invest in next year. The little desktop speakers I have are pretty crappy, and I'd be happy to get rid of those things. So, talk some gear in the comments down below. Have fun with it. And that's going to do it. So until next time, everybody, have fun, take care, and keep banging your head. And if you want to buy me that $51,000 turntable for a Christmas present, I'm not going to say no.